Good morning, World HRD Congress. As Emmanuel mentioned, my name is Kristopher Newbauer. I am the Chief People Officer of Rotary International and the Rotary Foundation, and I also serve as Chair Emeritus of the Board of Directors of the International Accreditors for Continuing Education and Training, which is an organization that was founded by the United States Department of Education in the early 60s to quantify non-academic education. It's my pleasure to be here with you today to talk about moving from chaos to clarity in the context of evaluating and improving performance. I don't know about you, but the world feels pretty chaotic, and I don't use the word chaos to be dramatic. I use it to be descriptive. Let me share a story about what I mean. Very early in my HR career, I was invited to sit down with an employee and a manager to talk about a performance issue. This employee came to me quite upset, as you might imagine, was long tenured, highly credentialed, well respected. You see, the issue was that this employee's manager had just told them that they were not meeting expectations. As an HR professional, this employee sought me out to help build the relationship between them and their manager. I could not agree more with Ed that relationships are critical in the workplace. And if we accept how important the relationship is between a manager and an employee, we can help them move from chaos to clarity. And I want to share with you how. As I listened to the employee and the manager talk, there were a couple of things that emerged. The employee said to the manager, "I have no idea what's expected of me." And the manager said to the employee, "How can that be? I've spent the past year talking to you about what is expected of you." This is what I mean by chaos. Here we have two very intelligent people, two very dedicated employees who are experiencing two drastically different realities. When those realities cannot coexist, that is chaos. And in this chaos, there's confusion, there's ambiguity, there's skepticism, there's too much room for subjectivity, and there's the element of surprise, which we never want from an HR perspective in performance management. As I listened to the employee and the manager speak, what I heard from them was that they did discuss expectations, but the problem was that the expectations were not clear, they were not documented, and they were not mutually understood. The other issue that I heard evolve was this idea of observation. The manager couldn't provide examples of where the employee was falling short. There was no evidence, there was nothing collected to be able to substantiate to the employee where the performance concerns were. The manager clearly made an assessment that the employee was not meeting expectations, but this evaluation felt far too subjective and personal. It was driven by emotion and perceptions rather than objective performance measures. And last, one of the things that dawned on me was that these two people spent no time talking about what needed to happen to bring them together so that it became clear what the expectations were and the employee could meet those expectations. So out of this discussion was born a 4-step evaluation framework that I want to talk with you about today. Step 1, expectation. Step 2, observation. Step 3, evaluation. And step 4, calibration. And I'll walk through each one of these. Now, I do want to point out that this is a cyclical process. This is not linear. This could be micro, so a moment in time, or it could be macro, spanning the entire performance evaluation year. Let's start with step 1, expectation. This is essentially desired performance. What should be happening? Now, to be clear about expectations, we want to make sure that They include what needs to be done, how well it needs to be done, and by when it needs to be done. These clear expectations provide clarity, they provide consistency. One of the things from an HR perspective that becomes very important is that we are holding all employees performing the same job accountable to the same expectations. We're not comparing people to people, we're comparing people to the expectations of their responsibilities of their role. When expectations are done well, it also makes sure that there's alignment. We make sure that our employees are producing outputs and outcomes that enable our business strategies. All the things that they do, all of the work that they're producing is aligned to achieving strategic business goals. The other thing that's critically important is that they become measurable, so that if a manager were to leave and another manager were to step in, we remove the element of subjectivity and introduce more objectivity. It's very clear what the expectations are and very clear about how we're going to measure whether or not the employee is achieving those expectations. And lastly, it offers the opportunity for accountability. Ed said in the past session that it's critical to say, I believe in you, I see you, I believe in you, but also I have a responsibility to help you succeed. And part of that responsibility as a manager and part of our responsibility as HR professionals is to make sure that people succeed. Part of the responsibility of that is holding people accountable to expectations. So, quick question for you. What percentage of employees do you think strongly agree that they know what is expected of them at work? If you think it's 83%, raise your hand. If you think it's 68%, raise your hand. If you think it's 46%, raise your hand. If you think it's 27%, raise your hand. We have a little bit of chaos because we're not sure what it is. But this question actually appears on the Gallup organization employee engagement survey known as the Q12. And that is, I understand what is expected of me at work. Gallup reports that the score for employees across the world on this particular item is about 46%, which means 46% of people understand what's expected of them at work. More than half do not clearly understand what's expected of them at work. Here's where this becomes even more problematic. What percentage of managers believe that they communicate expectations effectively? How many of you think it's 90%? Raise your hand. How many think it's 75%? Raise your hand. What about 65%? How about 50%? What if I told you that the answer is 90%? 90% of managers think that they're clearly communicating expectations, but yet only 46% of employees feel that they clearly understand what those expectations are. If this isn't chaos, I don't know what is. So, how are these expectations set? In the absence of clear expectations, unfortunately, that leaves employees to do a lot of guessing work or assuming what is expected of them. They might compare themselves to what other people are doing. They might use external benchmarks. Informing or telling is another way that expectations are set. We often see this in the workplace where managers inform or tell someone to do something. Quick exercise for you. What I'd like you to do is just take out a piece of paper and a pen. And I want to give you an expectation. And I'm going to see in step 2, when we get the observation, how well you performed to that expectation. Here's the exercise. What I'd like you to do is on a piece of paper, draw a table. You don't have to share it with anyone. But my expectation of you is that you draw a table. And I'll come back to this in a moment. Now, part of the challenge of informing or telling people what expectations is, as you might imagine, There's one truth in this world, and that is, if that worked, no kid's bedroom would be messy anywhere in the world. If simply telling someone or informing them what to do worked, we wouldn't need HR professionals. And the last one that I have on the screen here is collaborating or co-creating. This is what I'm arguing from an HR perspective will build that relationship between an employee and a manager. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to step 4, which is calibration. How do we help managers and employees collaborate and co-create expectations so there's mutual understanding? Step 2, observation. Once we have a very clear expectation of what should happen, the question now becomes, what is the actual performance? In other words, what did happen? So when we get to step 3, which is evaluation, we need to compare what should happen to what did happen. During the observation phase, we need to collect objective performance measures. This is why establishing very clear, documented, and mutually understood performance expectations becomes so important, because those inform what the measures are to figure out whether or not our employees are performing to those expectations. Data collection methods could be a direct observation, meaning the manager is simply observing the performance. Looking at outcomes or outputs, so this is results-based. So is what's being produced or is what's being generated or created meeting expectations? Using data analytics. Perhaps there are dashboards that provide data where in real time an employee or their manager or both can go and look at what performance looks like in terms of collected performance measures. And then feedback. Soliciting individual feedback, soliciting managers' feedback, soliciting customers' feedback, so on and so forth. But collecting data so that when and if a manager has to tell an employee that they are not performing, there's evidence to back up that statement. And more importantly, there's data that can be used to figure out what needs to change in the calibration step to fix the situation. So here we're comparing the expectation, the desired performance, what should happen, with an observation, the actual performance, what actually did happen. So for example, we say the expectation was Y. In observation, we determine that the result, expectation was X. In the observation, the result we determined was Y. The variance is Z. What do we do about it? We'll talk about that in a second. Step number 3, evaluation. The challenge with not following these 4 steps is that managers tend to go straight to step 3, which is the evaluation. And without having clear expectations, and without having data and evidence to support an evaluation, this starts to feel personal to employees. In the evaluation, we're making a comparison. Again, I mentioned not people to people, but performance to expectations. So we're simply looking at what was expected to happen versus what did happen. And then we're making a judgment about that result. And when I use the word judgment, I don't use it meaning a subjective assessment. I mean it to draw on evidence to determine whether or not the performance is meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, or falling below expectations. And I just want to point out that there are 2 forms of evaluation that can occur in step 3. One is known as formative evaluation, which tends to be in real time. It's meant to be formative in the sense that it helps individuals grow and develop and improve as they work. And the second is summative evaluation. This is more along the lines of administrative decisions that usually HR works with managers on determining. Things like what salary increase should the employee receive, whether or not there should be a promotion or perhaps even a demotion, those kinds of administrative decisions. It's summative because that comes at the end. So generally an annual performance appraisal or a quarterly assessment or whatever the case might be in your organization. So now we've juxtaposed the 3 steps here. We've got expectation, observation, and evaluation. So desired performance, actual performance, and comparing the 2. So what should happen, what did happen, and now we've got to make a decision about, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that a positive thing or a negative thing? If what did happen equals what should happen, that employee meets expectations. If what did happen is greater than what was expected to happen, that employee exceeds expectations. If what did happen is less than what should have happened, the employee falls below expectations. So this is what happens in step 3, evaluation. But again, supported by very strong evidence from step 2, observation. So let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons for the gaps between what should happen and what did happen. One thing that happens that creates a gap is the expectation was not documented or communicated, so the employee may not have understood what was expected of them. Perhaps the expectation was unrealistic. Perhaps some expectation was given to an employee that they could not possibly meet. Perhaps the employee was unaware or did not understand what the expectation was. Perhaps the employee was unable to perform, either due to capacity, training issue, whatever the case might be. Perhaps performance was not adequately measured, or perhaps evidence was not collected. This brings us to step 4, calibration. So what do we do about it? We talked about the what, we talked about the so what. Calibration is the now what. What do we do about this? This step is all about improvement and how to help employees change. So now we add step 4, calibration, to the grid here. So what are some possible changes? Well, one possible change is no change at all. If the employee's actual performance is fully meeting expectations, we may not expect a change. Another is a change in expectation. Perhaps we need to rethink what's expected. Perhaps expectations are unreasonable, meaning they're too high and unable to be attained, or perhaps we increase the expectation. But again, what's important here is that we're not comparing people to people. So if we're increasing expectations, it's not for a person, it's for a job. So that expectation needs to change for everyone who's performing that same role. Perhaps we need to focus on a change in performance. We need to get the employee to perform better. Perhaps we need to offer better tools, equipment, or resources. Perhaps we need to offer more training and development so that we can improve an employee's knowledge, skills, or abilities. And in some cases, the hard reality is that sometimes what needs to change in calibration is a change in manager or a change in employee. So just quickly, to sum this up, this 4-step process to evaluating and improving performance suggests that expectations need to be defined before performance is observed. Performance needs to be observed before it's judged. And performance needs to be judged before it can be calibrated. So some requirements for this to be successful. The expectation must be documented and communicated. Remember, we want clear, documented, mutually understood expectations. The expectation must be realistic. It must be achievable. These are not goals. The employee must be aware and understand what is expected of them. Employee must be able to perform to the expectation. So what are we doing as either the manager or human resources to ensure conditions are conducive to people performing to expectations? Performance must also be able to be measured. This is critically important so that we have objective evaluations for people, and it's not just based on a feeling or a hunch or a guess. And lastly, evidence must be collected. So what are some benefits of using this 4-step process? Expectation, observation, evaluation, calibration. I'll offer you some. One is that if you do this, it reinforces the relationships that Ed talked about between a manager and a supervisor. You'll experience fewer performance disputes. There'll be fewer surprises during the evaluation process. It will enhance trust in the organization. You'll have stronger legal defensibility when it comes to managing poor performance. And you'll have better informed learning and development programs that are guided by data and not just by what people think needs to be offered to employees. So, in closing, if we're going to move from chaos to clarity, we need to move away from confusion. We need to move away from ambiguity. We need to move away from subjectivity. We need to move away from all of these things that create a chaotic environment between a manager and a supervisor and move towards performance that's more strategic. So with that, I thank you for your time and your attention. Namaste.
Fine, thank you. I hope there are no questions. I would like to appreciate Kristopher. But, when Kristopher said write a table, I know there was a lot of confusion. Because to me, I was thinking table. So I know if we were to check the papers, some they draw a table, and some they draw a table, mathematical table. Which brings me to a point that clarity is very crucial, and communication is very crucial as well. One speaker said 80% of organizational problems can be performance problems. It is caused by poor communication. If you don't communicate properly, we won't get results. Which brings us to what? So what? And now what? Thank you, Kristopher.
If I could just follow up to what Emmanuel said, I forgot to revisit the exercise of the table. How many of you actually drew a table that you sit at? How many of you drew a table of data with columns and rows? Chaos. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So I shared with you what the expectation was. You delivered on what you thought you were supposed to create based on the expectation. Chaos.